When talking about Shakespearean plays, we have tragedies and comedies as the two major subsets. Uh, Unlike the names suggest, tragedy and comedy does not just mean sad or funny. It means a whole lots of different things, and so we're going to go into that. But a fun fact, this super famous smile, sad face element here that's famous for drama is actually depicting the two kinds of plays that Shakespeare is famous for. So starting with tragedies, the structure overall, and this is something that you're really going to want to pay attention to, is from order to chaos. So it's not just sad. It's not just full of death. It also is starts with everything being as it should be, but as the play goes on, characters make decisions that ultimately end the play in chaos. We have a tragic hero, which I'll explain in a little bit. We've got the characters are making decisions that result in death and have grave consequences. These are things that you can't really go back on. And the main characters always die at the end of tragedies. There's absolutely no exceptions to that. For tragic heroes, they're going to be the protagonist of the story, or that main character, and they're always going to have some kind of tragic flaw. So their tragic flaw is going to be something about their character or some characteristic that they have that becomes that thing that becomes their downfall. So with Macbeth, his ambition is a huge issue. If he never wanted to be king, then none of the play for Macbeth would have happened. And then the same thing with trusting his wife. If he wasn't so easily manipulated by her because of his relationship with her, then it's entirely possible that they would not, she would not have been able to convince Duncan, or him, to kill Duncan. Same thing with Othello. He's too trusting of the wrong people. Instead of trusting his wife Desdemona, he ends up trusting Iago, who wants to get revenge from him. We've got Romeo. He has the sense of honor that he feels like he needs to upkeep in order to be worthy of Juliet. And he's stubborn. And both of those things cause a lot of the issues that are going on. And then I thought this was a really silly graphic here. What are other words for tragic flaw? Hamartia is going to be something that you're going to see more often. Fatal flaw, right? Because it ends up being their fatality. They die because of it. It's a vulnerability, a weak point. Chink in the armor is a nice metaphor for it. Failing flaw, right? A character flaw, and a downfall. I don't know about back. Back is weird. But ultimately, every tragedy has a tragic hero. When we cut to comedy, it's the exact opposite of a tragedy. So the structure, instead of going from order to chaos, goes from chaos to order. So it starts out with things being out of the ordinary, things not being as they should be. And as the play goes, it gets a little crazy. Comedies are known for that, but it also ends in order, where things are exactly the way they should be. There's always going to be some kind of love, disguises where people are dressing as other people, mistaken identities, things like that. Decisions that the characters make will usually result in confusion and hilarity. It's usually very funny, and instead of decisions bringing death and destruction, these decisions are just going to bring confusion and some fun scenes to that. And instead of main characters always dying, main characters in comedies are always going to get married or are going to participate or partake in a feast at the end. Comedies are really well known for the complicated plots that they have and this mistaken character identity aspect. There's usually 4 main characters in a comedy. You usually have 2 guys and 2 girls. If that's not the case, you will have definitely 2 main characters. You're never going to have 1 main character for a comedy. There's also going to be at least 2 separate storylines going on at the same time. With some of the comedies, there's actually going to be more than that. and they always are going to intersect at some point, which makes it really funny. Girls are going to be pretending to be boys. Characters are going to be dressed in borrowed robes. That's a phrase that Shakespeare uses in many of his plays, where characters either are not fitting the robes that they should be fitting, or are borrowing somebody else's clothes to fit a particular character. Things that tragedies and comedies have in common. The main characters are usually going to be from the aristocracy. That's the high class or the nobility of that society. And if they aren't from the aristocracy, they're usually going to have ties to that nobility somehow. The Merchant of Venice is obviously about a merchant who is not noble, so that's one of the exceptions to the rule, but it's usually going to be that way. And then there's always going to be a fool character. This is going to be a character that typically in our society we would not think they would have it together. They are seen as foolish or as the fool. But that character is actually one of the few characters in the play who's going to have really awesome insights into what's going on. They're going to see through the lies or through the drama that's been happening, and they'll make a comment about it. Usually these are going to happen with a servant will say something that's really insightful, or a jester, right? Like a Joker type character. This can also be any kind of soothsayer or a beggar or somebody who is usually seen as the drudges of society. They then become, Shakespeare uses them to bring insights into the situation, and so they see things that the other characters don't see. The last category that is kind of a big genre in Shakespeare's plays are the histories, which is actually a subset of tragedies. So if you're talking about histories that Shakespeare has written, they're actually tragedies, but they use historical characters and their stories in that tragedy structure. So it's going to focus on a historical monarch of some kind and tell their story in a play format. Julius Caesar's a pretty famous one. That one obviously is not a king or queen of England, right, but of Rome, and so that is a historical tragedy. Antony and Cleopatra is kind of the sequel to Julius Caesar. In that regard, Cleopatra is the queen of Egypt, and Antony was a good friend of Julius Caesar, and so there's kind of a connection there. Henry V, and there are others like Henry VI, Richard III. Those are going to be all the kings of England that unfortunately their stories are kind of tragic, but they make for good stories, and so Shakespeare wrote them. Other than that, that's basically it.